Update on the Brian Williams story. He has been suspended for 6 months without pay. That is significant. He makes $10 million a year, so that'll cost him $5 million. He'll be off the air for 6 months, which is an eternity in this business, and it is unclear whether he'll come back. So it turns out that they're doing a thorough investigation of Brian Williams. Now, some leaks claim that there's a lot more information about him rather than just the story about how his helicopter was hit by an RPG in Iraq. And just to be clear, do I think that he exaggerated and lied about that incident? Yes. Now, I've done an ironic defense of Brian Williams on this show before and on a blog that I wrote recently. And that defense is simply, yes, he lied, but it's about a stupid little exaggeration in the middle of the war. The lies that got us into this war are far more egregious, and no one's ever gotten fired for that. For example, Phil Donahue, Ashley Banfield opposed the war. They were fired by MSNBC executives. It's the same company as Brian Williams. Did they ever get fired? No. They never got any repercussions at all. 69% of Americans believe that Saddam Hussein was personally responsible for 9/11 when we went into the war. NBC, at the time owned by GE, a defense contractor, was part and parcel of that. Now, was Brian Williams part of that machine? Yes. But that's not what their issue with him is today. They say, oh, well, you know what, you exaggerate about a little story here or there. So what they want to do is they want to throw him under the bus, the rest of the media does, so that they could feel good about themselves. Oh, here's a sacrificial lamb. Oh, look at us, we have such great ethics. Please, spare me. Now, the NBC executives here, including Deborah Turnus, who's the president of NBC News, put out statements. They say that this was wrong and completely inappropriate for someone in Brian's position. Stephen Burke, who's the chief executive of NBC Universal, says, by his actions, Brian has jeopardized the trust millions of Americans place in NBC News. His actions are inexcusable, and this suspension is severe and appropriate. I'm slightly amused by all that, because really, what trust? Are people going home thinking, like, if Brian Williams tells me something, I really trust it? Or, oh, I don't trust Brian as much anymore, but Lester Holt, boy, I trust him. It's just not how it works, man. I mean, in the old days, they had to earn your trust because there wasn't all these other news sources. So you'd come home and you had to decide who's going to tell me the news. Is it going to be Walter Cronkite or one of the other two people, right? And whoever I trust more, I'm going to listen to that news. We already have the news. We already got it online. This is news for geriatrics. And so this idea of, oh, he burned their trust. What trust? These are the guys who misled us on almost every issue, including the Iraq War. I'm not just talking about NBC, all of the establishment media. You didn't have any trust to begin with. I mean, Brian Williams, again, I think this is a minor issue. The much bigger issue is he put generals on the air who said, oh, we absolutely have to go into Iraq and we have to use the Abrams tank, et cetera. Oops, it turns out they work for defense contractors who represent things like the Abrams tank. Oh, golly gee, oh, I forgot to tell you about that. But if you wanted to go after Brian Williams for that, well, then you'd have to fire the same NBC executives who are pretending to be outraged with him today. Now, they're not going to fire themselves, are they? So they're going to take Brian Williams and make him a scapegoat. So, and I've told you before, I know Brian Williams a tiny bit. He was on the show once, and when I was at MSNBC, he was a nice guy to me. Doesn't make much of a difference, as you just heard all my criticism of him. It's not a defense of him. It's a justified attack on the rest of the media. Now, Burke continues, Mr. Williams has shared his deep remorse with me, and he is committed to winning back everyone's trust. He added, he deserves a second chance, and we are rooting for him. I believe that. I believe that they're all relatively good friends. They've had a long-standing relationship, and they're rooting that he can get past this and come back on the air. Plus, he's their star. They don't really have that good a bench in their world, according to the way they think, right? And so they want Brian Williams to come back and to be able to do this. And people that know Brian Williams say that he is shattered by what has happened. Okay. But to me, I say, who cares who reads the news from the teleprompter? They're not writing the news. Their producers write the news. The executives decide what is and is not kosher. So you got another actor to read the news. Wow. Okay. Oh, Lester Holt, boy. Ooh, I really trust him. Based on what? I mean, Lester Holt, I'm sure, is a sweet guy, good guy, nothing wrong with Lester Holt. I got nothing against him. I obviously have nothing against Brian Williams. As a person, I like him. But they're reading a script. What's the trust part? So then we go to journalism professor Mark Feldstein. I don't know how he can ever read the news with a straight face or how the public will respond if he does. Who gives a shit who's reading the news. I mean, understand what the news actors on television do. It's as if they grabbed a newspaper. They're like, all right, I will now authoritatively read the New York Times to you. Oh, thanks a lot. I really appreciate that. But, well, do I trust you to read it right? I'm just confused by this whole fucking thing. They didn't go out and gather the news. I mean, look, on rare occasion, they'll be out in the field. Iraq, Hurricane Katrina, that's part of what got Brian Williams in trouble. But most of the time, they're sitting in a studio. They have a staff of hundreds who are writing the news for them. So we're really supposed to care which particular actor reads that news? Okay. Feldstein continues, maybe they're hoping that with a 6-month cooling off period, he's got a loyal fan base. Which person in the mainstream media has a fan base? So they've got the cult of neutrality, right? They stopped being objective. They stopped telling the American people, hey, Saddam Hussein didn't do 9/11. That's a fact. He didn't do 9/11. Instead, they said Republicans say this, Democrats say that, George Bush says this, nobody else said any other thing because we fired them if they did. So I'm neutral. And you played this dispassionate neutral game, and it turned out, oops, when you got in trouble, you don't have any fans. Why would you be a fan of any news anchor if you want to be generous with them? Who's a fan of Scott Pelley? Oh man, Scott's on. Oh, I love that guy. Go get him, Scott Pelley. What world do you live in, man? You're living in the world of 1955. That doesn't exist anymore. And that's why when you build your career on quicksand, yeah, the minute there's any trouble, nobody's got your back because you didn't earn their trust in the first place. And again, this is not about Brian Williams. It's about all of them. You think anybody would stand up for Lester Holt or Scott Pelley or David Muir or any of them if they got into trouble? Why would they stand up for them? These are the guys who told us, oh, no, they definitely got weapons of mass destruction. You want to give them a huge pass on that? I understand, okay? But they never bothered to tell you all the things that the Bush administration was lying about. When it was torture, they called it enhanced interrogation because the Bush administration wanted them to tell that. I've got 1,000 different examples. Gee, I wonder how you lost their trust. It wasn't by exaggerating or lying about a story of a helicopter being fired on in Iraq. That's a tiny little dot in this whole picture. Finally, New York Times says 6 months is a long time to disappear from the television landscape. An analyst said it would be difficult for him to reestablish himself as a viable nightly presence. All of these people in the old media are living in a completely different world. In their world, Brian Williams comes back 6 months from now, and people are like, oh, who is that guy? Ooh, I don't quite remember him, and I think he's lost my trust. I have now built a bond with Lester Holt. I'm not sure I could let him go. Dude, man, the whole ship, it's the Titanic, and you're rearranging the deck chairs. We're going to take the Brian Williams chair out for 6 months. We're going to put in the Lester Holt chair for another 6 months, and boy, that'll solve the problem. No, you missed the whole point. Nobody trusts you at all. None of you. Television news. What is that? When's the last time any of these guys ever broke a story, did investigative journalism? They don't do it because they don't want to investigate the government. They're not watchdogs, they're lapdogs. So the idea of which particular news actor is going to read you the news that night is the single most irrelevant thing I have ever heard. And the fact that they're carrying on and on as if it's so goddamn important both amuses and frustrates me. Okay, so the reality is it doesn't matter, okay? Whether it's Brian Williams or anything else or anyone else, they're going to read you the standard thing that the government is okay with, the corporation that runs NBC News is okay with, and that what the establishment and the mainstream has decided is acceptable. It doesn't matter which actor reads it to you, the substance is going to be the same, which has proven itself to be over and over again untrustworthy.